During my husband's funeral, my son and his fiancée threw my clothes on the sidewalk. We already sold the house. Gather your things, cry, and figure it out. With trembling hands, I called our former maid's son, whose college I secretly paid for, now a self-made millionaire. No one knew I had his number. When he pulled up in a Rolls-Royce Ghost, no one could have predicted what happened. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Denise, and I never imagined that the worst day of my life would get even worse. But that's exactly what happened during my husband Robert's funeral, when my own son decided to destroy what little dignity I had left. The cemetery was still damp from the morning rain when the last visitors offered their condolences and walked away. I stood there, clutching a wilted rose, staring at the fresh mound of earth that now covered my husband of 42 years. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of traffic. "Mom, we need to talk." Colin's voice cut through my grief like a knife. I turned to see my 35-year-old son standing behind me, his fiancée Sienna at his side. Even in that moment, I noticed how she clung to his arm possessively, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. "Can't this wait, sweetheart?" I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. "Your father was just buried an hour ago." Colin's face was stone cold, showing no trace of the little boy who used to run to me for comfort when he scraped his knee. "No, it can't wait. We have things to settle." Sienna stepped forward, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light. She had this smile that never reached her eyes, the kind that made my skin crawl whenever she visited. "Denise, we know this is hard, but Colin and I have made some decisions about the house." My house. The house where I'd lived for 38 years, where I'd raised Colin, where every corner held memories of Robert and me building our life together. My legs suddenly felt weak. "What kind of decisions?" I managed to ask. Colin shifted uncomfortably, but his voice remained firm. "We sold it, Mom. The sale went through yesterday morning, right before the funeral." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward, my hand reaching for something to steady myself, but finding only empty air. "You... what?" "The market was good, and we got a great price," Sienna added cheerfully, as if she were discussing the weather. $87,000 above asking price. Can you believe it?" I stared at them both, trying to process what I was hearing. "But that's my home. Robert and I, we bought that house when you were just 2 years old, Colin. All our memories." "Look, Mom," Colin interrupted, his tone growing impatient. "You're 67 years old. You don't need a big house anymore. Sienna and I talked about it, and we think it's better this way. Cleaner." Cleaner, like I was some kind of mess that needed to be tidied up. "Where am I supposed to live?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Sienna shrugged, examining her perfect red nail polish. "There are some nice senior living facilities around here. Very affordable. You'll make new friends, play bingo, learn to knit. It'll be fun." Fun. She thought turning my world upside down would be fun. I looked at Colin, searching his face for any sign of the son I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. "Colin, this is insane. You can't just sell my house without telling me. It's not even legal." "Actually, it is." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Dad put the house in my name 3 years ago. Said it would be easier for taxes or something. I have every right to sell it." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Robert had never mentioned this to me, never said a word about transferring our home to Colin. My knees finally gave out, and I sank onto a nearby bench, the rose falling from my trembling fingers. "The new owners take possession on Monday," Sienna continued, checking her phone as if she had somewhere more important to be. "So you'll need to have your things out by Sunday evening." 3 days, I whispered. "You're giving me 3 days to move out of my own home." "We're being generous," Colin said. "We could have given you 24 hours. I sat there in stunned silence, watching my son and his fiancée discuss my future like I wasn't even there. They talked about which moving company was cheapest, whether I really needed all my furniture, and how much money they'd save by not having to maintain the property. Then Colin said something that broke what was left of my heart. "Honestly, Mom, this is probably for the best. You've been pretty useless since Dad got sick anyway. At least this way, you'll have some structure in your life. Useless. After 42 years of marriage, after raising his ungrateful son, after working 2 jobs to help pay for his college education, while he partied his way through business school, I was useless. That's when I remembered the small piece of paper tucked away in my purse, a phone number I'd carried with me for 15 years, never thinking I'd actually use it. With shaking hands, I fumbled through my bag until I found it, written in my own fading handwriting. I need to make a phone call, I said, standing up on unsteady legs. Make it quick, Sienna called after me. We have dinner reservations at 7. I walked about 20 feet away, close enough to the parking lot that they could still see me, but far enough that they couldn't hear my conversation. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number, half expecting it to be disconnected after all these years. It rang twice before a deep, warm voice answered. Marcus Wellington speaking. Marcus, my voice cracked. It's Denise. Denise Patterson. I need help. There was a pause, then his voice softened with concern. Mrs. Patterson, what's wrong? Where are you? I'm at Greenwood Cemetery. My husband's funeral just ended, and my son, he sold my house. I have nowhere to go. The words tumbled out between sobs. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. Don't you apologize, Marcus said firmly. Don't you dare apologize. I'm 20 minutes away. Stay exactly where you are. 23 minutes later, I heard the smooth purr of an expensive engine. Colin and Sienna were still standing by Robert's grave, probably calculating how they'd spend their newfound wealth, when a gleaming silver Rolls-Royce Ghost pulled into the cemetery parking lot. I watched from my bench as their conversation stopped mid-sentence. Sienna's mouth actually fell open, and Colin squinted at the approaching car like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Marcus Wellington. Gone was this skinny 12-year-old boy I remembered. In his place stood a man of 43, tall and confident, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and when he smiled at me, I saw the same gentle kindness that had drawn me to him as a child. Mrs. Patterson, he said, striding over to me with arms outstretched, I'm so sorry for your loss. I stood up and fell into his embrace, finally feeling safe for the first time since Robert's diagnosis 6 months ago. Marcus held me while I cried, his expensive suit absorbing my tears without complaint. Who the hell is that? I heard Colin whisper to Sienna, his voice carrying across the quiet cemetery. Marcus pulled back and looked at me with genuine concern. Tell me what happened. As I explained about the house sale, I watched Colin and Sienna slowly approach, their expressions ranging from confusion to suspicion. They'd never seen Marcus as an adult, never imagined that the poor kid from the wrong side of town could become this. Excuse me. Colin called out when he was close enough. I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Colin Patterson, Denise's son. Marcus turned, and I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, certainly, but something else too, something colder. Colin Patterson, Marcus said slowly, extending his hand. I remember you. Colin shook it hesitantly. I'm sorry, but I don't... Do we know each other? We went to the same elementary school. I'm Marcus Wellington, though back then I was just Marcus Rodriguez, the poor kid whose mom cleaned your house every Tuesday. The color drained from Colin's face. I could see the memories flooding back, and none of them were pleasant. Sienna looked confused, glancing between the two men like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Marcus Rodriguez, Colin repeated slowly. You mean Maria's boy? The one who used to... He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. The one you used to lock in the basement storage room when your mother wasn't looking? The one you told couldn't use the main bathroom because my family was the help? Yes, that's me. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Sienna was the first to recover, her fake smile returning. Well, isn't this a lovely reunion? Marcus, was it? What do you do for work these days? Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I own Wellington Enterprises. We specialize in real estate development and investment. I watched Sienna's face change as she read the card, her eyes widening with each word. She showed it to Colin, whose face went from pale to green. Wellington Enterprises, Colin stammered. You mean the Wellington Enterprises? The one that owns half the commercial real estate downtown? Among other things, Marcus replied casually. Then he turned back to me, his voice warm again. Mrs. Patterson, let's get you out of here. You shouldn't have to deal with this today. But what happened next shocked everyone, including me. As Marcus helped me into the passenger seat of his Rolls Royce, the leather soft against my back, I couldn't help but think about the first time I'd met him. He was 12 years old then, all knees and elbows, with clothes that were clean but worn thin from too many washings. His mother, Maria, had been working for our family for about 6 months when she finally worked up the courage to ask if she could bring Marcus with her one Tuesday. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Patterson, Maria had said, wringing her hands nervously. My usual babysitter is sick and I don't have anyone else to watch him. He'll be no trouble, I promise. He can just sit in the kitchen and do his homework. I'd said yes, of course. Maria was the best housekeeper we'd ever had, and I could see how hard she worked to provide for her son. And what I hadn't expected was how cruel Colin would be to the boy. The memory was crystal clear as Marcus started the engine, the car purring to life, with barely a whisper. I remembered standing at my kitchen window, watching Colin corner Marcus by our pool house. Colin was 14 then, already taller than Marcus, already learning the kind of casual cruelty that comes so easily to some children. This is our pool, Colin had said, pointing to the crystal blue water. Poor kids aren't allowed to swim in it. Poor kids aren't even allowed to look at it. Marcus had just nodded, clutching his math homework to his chest. He never fought back, never complained, never told his mother what Colin did when the adults weren't watching. But I saw everything. I saw Colin lock him in the basement storage room and tell him it was where the help belonged. I saw him pour Marcus's lunch in the garbage and tell him that people like him should be grateful for scraps. I saw him hide Marcus's homework and then call him stupid when the boy couldn't find it. The worst part was that Robert thought Colin was just being a typical teenager. Boys will be boys, he'd say whenever I brought up Colin's behavior. It builds character. Whose character, I'd always wondered. Because it certainly wasn't building anything good in Colin. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's voice brought me back to the present. We were stopped at a red light, and he was looking at me with concern. Are you okay? You seemed far away for a moment. I was remembering, I said softly. The first time I met you, do you remember that day? Marcus smiled, but there was sadness in it. I remember everything about those days, including what your son did to me. We drove in silence for a few minutes, through neighborhoods I'd known my whole life, past the elementary school where both boys had attended, past the park where I used to take Colin when he was small, before he became the cold stranger I'd buried my husband with today. I need to tell you something, I said finally, something I should have told you years ago. Marcus glanced at me quickly before focusing back on the road. What is it? I know you never understood why things changed for you when you turned 16, why you suddenly got that full scholarship to prep school, why all your expenses were covered, why you never had to worry about money for college. I saw his hands tighten slightly on the steering wheel. The scholarship foundation said it was need-based, anonymous donors who wanted to help disadvantaged students. There was no foundation, Marcus, it was me. The car slowed as Marcus processed what I'd said. He pulled into an empty parking lot and turned to face me fully. What do you mean it was you? The words came out in a rush, like a dam breaking after years of holding back water. I couldn't stand watching Colin treat you that way. I couldn't stand seeing your mother work herself to the bone while her brilliant son had no opportunities. So I did something about it. Marcus stared at me, his dark eyes wide with shock. You paid for my education, all of it. Every penny, the prep school tuition, room and board, books, spending money, then college, then law school, $187,000 over 7 years. I'd never told anyone that number before, not even Robert. I had a separate savings account that I'd been building since Colin was born, money I put away from my teaching salary, before I became a full-time mother. Robert never knew about it. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. When you graduated from Harvard Law, when you sent me that photo of yourself in your cap and gown, that was the proudest day of my life. prouder than when Colin graduated business school, prouder than his engagement to Sienna, because you earned everything you achieved, and I had the privilege of helping you get there. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now, and he wasn't trying to hide them. Why didn't you ever tell me? All these years, I thought. I thought I was just lucky. I thought some stranger took pity on me. Because I didn't want you to feel obligated to me. I didn't want you to succeed because you felt you owed me something. I wanted you to succeed because you deserved to succeed. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out at the empty parking lot. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Do you know what Colin said to me the last day I was at your house? I was 16, about to start at Cranfield Prep, and he cornered me in the garage. I shook my head, though I was afraid to hear the answer. He said that people like me would always be servants, that no matter how much I pretended to be better than I was, I'd always end up cleaning toilets like my mother. He said that's all my family was good for. The anger that flared in my chest was so intense it took my breath away. Even after all these years, even knowing how cruel Colin could be, hearing those words spoken aloud made me want to scream. I almost believed him, Marcus continued. I was so angry, so humiliated. But then I got to Cranfield, and for the first time in my life, I was around people who judged me based on who I was, not where I came from. I excelled there. I made friends. I learned that Colin was wrong about me. He was wrong about everything, I said fiercely. You were worth 10 of him even then. Marcus reached over and took my hand. His was warm and strong, calloused from years of hard work despite his current success. You saved my life, Mrs. Patterson. I hope you know that. Without your help, without believing in me when no one else would, I would have given up. I would have accepted that Colin was right about me. Never, I said firmly. You were special from the moment I met you. You had something Colin never had and never will have. What's that? A good heart. We sat there for a while longer, both of us crying, both of us remembering. I thought about all the times over the years when I'd wanted to reach out to Marcus, to tell him the truth, to see how he was doing. But I'd always held back, afraid that contact with me would somehow taint his new life. I kept track of you, I admitted. When you started your first company, when you made your first million, when Wellington Enterprises went public, I was so proud. But I was also terrified that if I contacted you, it would somehow ruin everything you'd built. Marcus laughed, wiping his eyes. Ruin it? Mrs. Patterson, knowing that you were the one who made it all possible, makes every success mean so much more. All these years, I've been successful for myself, for my mother's memory, for the other kids like me who need to see that it's possible. But now I know I've also been successful for you. For the woman who saw potential in a scared 12-year-old and decided to bet everything on him. Your mother, I said suddenly, remembering Maria's kind face. How is she? I lost touch after she stopped working for us. Marcus's expression grew sad. She passed away 8 years ago. Cancer. But she lived long enough to see me graduate from law school, to see me start my first company. She died knowing that her son had made something of himself. Did she ever know about the scholarship money? I told her on her deathbed. She cried for an hour straight, then made me promise to find you someday and thank you properly. She didn't need to thank me. She raised an incredible son. We both know she had help, Marcus said gently. Not just financial help. You gave me something even more valuable than money. What's that? Hope, and the knowledge that somewhere in the world someone believed I was worth saving. As we pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward whatever came next, I realized that today had been both the worst and most redemptive day of my life. I'd lost my home, been betrayed by my son, and buried my husband. But I'd also found the answer to a question I'd carried for 15 years. Had it all been worth it? Looking at Marcus now, successful and confident and kind, I knew it had been worth every penny and more. But what I didn't know yet was that Marcus had plans of his own. Plans that would change everything for both of us, and for Colin too. Marcus drove us to a place I never expected to see, the law offices of Wellington and Associates. The building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel downtown, and as we pulled into the private parking garage, I realized this wasn't just where Marcus worked. This was his empire. You own this entire building? I asked as we stepped into a private elevator that required a special key card. Floors 15 through 30, Marcus replied casually. I bought it 3 years ago, when the previous owners defaulted on their mortgage. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that looked like something from a movie. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furniture was the kind you see in architectural magazines. A young woman behind the reception desk immediately stood up when she saw Marcus. Mr. Wellington, I wasn't expecting you today. How can I help? Sarah, I need you to pull the Patterson file. Everything we have on Robert and Colin Patterson, particularly the property transfers and will documentation. My blood went cold. Marcus, how do you have files on my family? He guided me to his office, which was even more impressive than the reception area. The walls were lined with law books and framed degrees, but what caught my attention was a photo on his desk, a picture of him at his law school graduation, with an older woman who had to be his mother, Maria. Mrs. Patterson, please sit down. What I'm about to tell you might be upsetting. I settled into the leather chair across from his massive desk, my hands trembling slightly. What kind of files do you have on us? Marcus opened a thick folder and spread several documents across his desk. 3 years ago, when your husband started showing signs of his illness, he came to see me. He hired me to review his estate planning and make sure everything was in order. The room felt like it was spinning. Robert came to see you? But how did he even know you existed? He'd been following my career through mutual acquaintances. When he learned about my success, and especially when he found out about my connection to your family, he sought me out. Marcus pulled out a document with Robert's signature at the bottom. He was worried about Colin, Mrs. Patterson, very worried. What do you mean? Your husband was aware of your son's gambling problem. Did you know that Colin had accumulated over $43,000 in debt to some very dangerous people? I felt the air leave my lungs. Gambling debt? What are you talking about? Marcus showed me a series of bank statements and credit reports. Online poker, sports betting, casino visits in Atlantic City. Colin had been hiding it from everyone, including Sienna. Robert discovered it when Colin tried to take out a loan using your house as collateral without telling anyone. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. So Robert transferred the house to Colin to help him with his debt? No, Marcus said firmly. Robert transferred the house to Colin as a trap. He pulled out another document, this one thick and covered in the legal language. This is your husband's real will, Mrs. Patterson, not the simple document that Colin thinks gives him ownership of everything. I stared at the papers, trying to make sense of the legal terminology. I don't understand. Your husband was smarter than Colin gave him credit for. Yes, he transferred the house deed to Colin's name, but he did it with very specific legal conditions attached. Conditions that Colin either ignored or never bothered to read. Marcus pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. According to this clause, Colin can only maintain ownership of the property if he provides adequate housing and financial support for you, his surviving parent, for the remainder of your natural life. If he fails to do so, ownership immediately reverts to a designated trustee. A trustee? Who? Marcus smiled for the first time since we'd arrived at his office. Me. Your husband appointed me as the trustee with full authority to reclaim and redistribute the property if Colin violated the terms. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. Robert had known. Somehow he'd known exactly what Colin would try to do, and he'd planned for it. There's more, Marcus continued. The sale that Colin conducted yesterday, it's completely illegal. He had no right to sell property that was conditionally transferred to him, especially not without honifying the terms of the trust. So the sale is invalid. Worse than that, by selling the property without meeting his obligations to you, Colin has committed several criminal acts: fraud, elder abuse, and breach of fiduciary duty. The buyers will get their money back, of course, but Colin... Marcus paused. Colin is going to face some serious legal consequences. I thought about my son, standing at his father's grave just hours ago, so confident and cruel, so certain that he'd outsmarted everyone. He had no idea what was coming for him. But Mrs. Patterson, there's something else your husband wanted me to tell you. Something he made me promise to share only after his passing. Marcus opened a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Robert's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter, and as I read it, tears began streaming down my face. My dearest Denise, the letter began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And Colin has shown his true colors, just as I feared he would. I know about the money you spent on Marcus Rodriguez. I've known for years. My hands began shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper. I found the bank statements when I was organizing our finances for the lawyer. $187,000 over 7 years, all going to anonymous scholarships and educational funds. At first, I was angry. How could you spend so much money without telling me? But then I realized something. You saw what I was too blind to see. Colin was becoming someone we couldn't be proud of, while Marcus was becoming the son we'd always hoped for. I had to stop reading for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. Robert had known all along. I'm ashamed to admit that I enabled Colin's behavior for too many years. I thought I was teaching him to be strong, but I was actually teaching him to be cruel. You tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. I'm sorry for that, and I'm sorry for waiting so long to do something about it. The letter continued. Marcus has agreed to help protect you from Colin's greed, and he's agreed to help you start a new life. You deserve so much more than I ever gave you, Denise. You deserve to be loved and cherished, not taken for granted. I hope that in protecting Marcus all those years ago, you found yourself a son who will protect you in return. By the time I finished reading, I was sobbing openly. Marcus handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently for me to compose myself. Your husband spent months planning this, Marcus said gently. He wanted to make sure Colin couldn't hurt you financially, and he wanted to make sure you'd have somewhere to go if things went badly. What happens now? I managed to ask. Now I filed the paperwork to invalidate the sale and reclaim the property. The buyers will be notified that they purchased stolen property essentially, and they'll be able to recover their money from the escrow account. Colin, however, will be facing criminal charges for fraud. And where will I live? Marcus smiled, and for a moment I saw the 12-year-old boy I'd once helped with his homework. Your husband made another provision in his will. He left you a substantial life insurance policy that Colin doesn't know about. $500,000, enough to buy a nice house wherever you want to live. $500,000. After being told I was worthless and useless, after being thrown out like garbage, I was actually wealthy enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But Mrs. Patterson, before you decide where to go, I have a proposition for you. I looked up at him through my tears. What kind of proposition? I've been successful in business, but I've been very lonely. I never married, never had children of my own. The closest thing I ever had to a family was those afternoons in your kitchen, watching you help me with my homework while Colin was at football practice. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I'd like to offer you the guest house on my property. It's completely private, fully furnished, and you'd never have to worry about money or safety again. Marcus, I couldn't possibly. You saved my life once, he said firmly. Let me return the favor. Before I could respond, his secretary knocked on the door. Mr. Wellington, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are 2 people here demanding to see you. They say they're Colin Patterson and his fiancée, and they seem very upset. Marcus and I looked at each other, and I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Send them in, Sarah. I think it's time for Colin and I to have a proper conversation. As the door opened and Colin stormed in with Sienna close behind, I realized that the real confrontation was just beginning. Colin burst through the office door like a man possessed, his expensive funeral suit wrinkled and his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. Sienna followed close behind, her perfect composure finally cracking as her eyes darted around Marcus's impressive office. What the hell is going on here? Colin demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at Marcus. What kind of game are you playing? Marcus remained perfectly calm, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who held all the cards. Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss. I'll stand, thanks, Colin snapped. I want to know why you showed up at my father's funeral like some kind of knight in shining armor. What's your angle? Sienna moved closer to the desk, her eyes taking in the expensive furnishings and framed diplomas on the walls. I could see her mind working, trying to calculate Marcus's net worth based on his surroundings. Colin, I said quietly, you should listen to what Marcus has to say. Don't tell me what to do, Mom, he shot back without even looking at me. I'm starting to think this whole thing was planned. Did you two cook this up together? Some kind of scheme to make me feel guilty about selling the house? Marcus picked up the folder containing all of Robert's legal documents. Your father hired me 3 years ago to handle his estate planning. Did you know that, Colin? The color drained from my son's face. That's impossible. Dad never mentioned any lawyer except old Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson handles wills and basic estate work, Marcus replied smoothly. Your father came to me for something more complex. He was concerned about your financial situation. Sienna frowned. What financial situation? Colin's doing great. He just got promoted to regional manager. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Colin, would you like to tell your fiancé about the $43,000 in gambling debt you've accumulated, or should I? The silence that followed was deafening. Colin's face went from pale to bright red, and Sienna turned to stare at him with horror. Gambling debt, she whispered. Colin, what is he talking about? It's not that much, Colin stammered. And it's under control. I just had a few bad weeks with the poker games, and there was this sure thing bet on the playoffs that didn't pan out. $43,000. Sienna's voice rose to almost a shriek. Are you insane? We're supposed to get married in 6 months. We're supposed to buy a house. Marcus spread out several bank statements and credit reports across his desk. The debt isn't just a casino, Sienna. $12,000 is owed to a loan shark named Vincent Torino. Are you familiar with that name, Colin? Now, I watched my son's face crumble as the full weight of his situation became clear. How do you know about Vincent? Because Vincent called me, Marcus said simply. When he couldn't reach you, he started making inquiries about your assets. He discovered that you'd recently come into ownership of a valuable property. He wanted to know if I was interested in handling the legal aspects of collecting on your debt. Sienna backed away from Colin like he was radioactive. You borrowed money from a loan shark? What kind of person are you? Vincent's not that bad, Colin said desperately. He gave me an extension until the end of the month. That's why I needed to sell the house so quickly. The money from the sale would have covered the debt and left plenty for our wedding. Would have covered it? Marcus emphasized the past tense. Colin, I have some bad news for you. The sale of your mother's house was completely illegal. What do you mean illegal? Colin's voice cracked like a teenager's. I own that house. Dad put it in my name. Marcus pulled out Robert's will and placed it in front of Colin. Your father transferred the property to you conditionally. You were required to provide housing and financial support for your mother for the rest of her life. By selling the house and throwing her out, you violated the terms of the transfer. Colin grabbed the document and scanned it frantically. I watched as his eyes found the relevant clause, then read it again and again as if he could will the words to change. This can't be legal, he said finally. You can't just add conditions after the fact. The conditions were there from the beginning, Marcus replied. You simply never bothered to read the fine print. Your father knew exactly what kind of person you were, Colin. He planned for this. Sienna was reading over Colin's shoulder, her face growing paler with each word. Oh my God, Colin, you don't actually own the house. You never did. So what happens now? Colin asked, his bravado finally collapsing. Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor addressing a defendant. Now, several things happened very quickly. First, I filed paper to invalidate the sale. The buyers will get their money back from escrow, but you'll be liable for all associated costs and fees. Second, I file a complaint with the district attorney's office for elder abuse, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Elder abuse? Colin sputtered. I didn't abuse anyone. You threw your 67-year-old mother out of her home 3 days after her husband's funeral, Marcus said coldly. You denied her access to her belongings and told her she had until Sunday to find somewhere to live. In legal terms, that's textbook elder abuse. I watched Colin's world crumble in real time. His hands were shaking as he set the will back on the desk, and sweat was beading on his forehead, despite the office's perfect climate control. There has to be something we can work out, he pleaded. Some kind of deal. I'll apologize to Mom. I'll find her a nice apartment. You'll what? Marcus interrupted. Pay for her housing with money you don't have? Money you've already spent or gambled away? Sienna suddenly spoke up, her voice sharp and angry. Wait a minute. If Colin doesn't actually own the house and the sale is invalid, then where exactly does that leave us financially? Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's an excellent question. Colin, would you like to explain to your fiance how much money you actually have in your bank accounts right now? Colin's silence was answer enough. Sienna turned to face him fully, her hands clenched into fists. Colin Patterson, you tell me right now how much money we have? The checking account has about $800. Colin mumbled. What about savings? There is no savings. What about the money your father left you? There wasn't any money, Colin admitted, just the house. And now? And now we have nothing, Sienna finished. Worse than nothing. We have negative $43,000. She stood up abruptly, pulling her engagement ring off her finger. I can't do this, Colin. I thought I was marrying someone successful, someone stable, not a gambling addict who steals from his own mother. Sienna, please, Colin begged. We can work this out. Marcus, surely there's some way to fix this. What if I pay you? What if I give you a percentage of whatever I make for the next few years? Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Colin with the same expression a scientist might use to examine an interesting specimen. You know what's funny, Colin? 15 years ago, when you told me I'd always be a servant, when you said my family would never amount to anything, I made myself a promise. What promise? I promised myself that someday, somehow, I'd be in a position to show you exactly how wrong you were. I imagined scenarios where I'd be successful and you'd be struggling, and where I'd have the power to help or hurt you. Marcus paused. I never imagined it would be this easy. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Colin looked around the office desperately, as if searching for an escape route. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to understand what powerlessness feels like, Marcus replied. I want you to know what it's like to have your entire world destroyed by someone who considers you worthless. I want you to experience the fear and humiliation that you put me through when I was a child. Sienna slammed her purse down on the desk, making everyone jump. I'm done with this circus, Colin. When you figure out how to become an adult and deal with your problems, call me. Until then, don't. She stormed out of the office, leaving Colin standing there like a man who'd just watched his life go up in flames. Please, Colin whispered, turning to me for the first time since entering the office. Mom, please, I know I was wrong about the house. I know I said things I shouldn't have said, but you can't let him destroy me. I'm your son. For a moment, looking at his desperate face, I almost felt sorry for him. This was the little boy I'd raised, the child I'd loved unconditionally, despite his flaws. But then I remembered his words at the cemetery. You've been pretty useless since Dad got sick anyway. You made your choice, Colin, I said quietly. You chose to see me as a burden instead of your mother. You chose to steal my home instead of taking care of me. You chose to gamble away your future instead of building something meaningful. But I'm your son, he repeated, as if that should excuse everything. Yes, you are, and that's what makes this so heartbreaking. Marcus stood up and walked around his desk to stand beside my chair. Colin, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to file all the necessary paperwork to reverse the illegal sale of your mother's house. You're going to face criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud, and Vincent Torino is going to come looking for his $43,000. You can't do this to me, Colin said desperately. We're family. Mom, tell him we're family. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized that somewhere along the way I'd lost him. The sweet boy I'd raised had become this selfish, cruel man who thought family was something you could take advantage of without consequences. Family doesn't throw each other away, Colin, I said. You taught me that today. As Marcus called security to escort Colin from the building, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel: relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about my son's problems becoming my problems. For the first time in decades, I was free to choose my own path. But I still had no idea just how much my life was about to change. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating afternoon in Marcus's office, and the consequences of Colin's actions were unfolding exactly as Marcus had predicted. I was staying in the beautiful guest house on Marcus's property, a charming 2-bedroom cottage with its own garden and complete privacy. For the first time in months, I was sleeping peacefully through the night. Marcus had been nothing but respectful and kind, checking on me daily but never intruding. He'd helped me retrieve my belongings from my old house before Colin could do anything with them, and he'd even hired a moving company to transfer everything to my new space. The cottage was fully furnished, but he insisted I bring anything that held sentimental value. "This is your home now," he'd said simply. "It should feel like you." I was arranging some of my favorite photos on the mantelpiece when I heard a car pull into the main driveway. Through my kitchen window, I could see a beat-up Honda Civic that I didn't recognize. The driver's door opened and Colin stepped out, looking haggard and desperate. My heart clenched despite everything that had happened. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled and ill-fitting, and he hadn't shaved in what looked like several days. This wasn't the confident, cruel man who'd thrown me out of my home. This was someone who'd hit rock bottom. I watched as he walked up to the main house and rang the doorbell. A few minutes later, Marcus appeared at my cottage door. "Your son is here," he said gently. "He's asking to see you. I told him it was your choice whether or not to speak with him." I looked out the window again. Colin was pacing back and forth on the porch, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from his childhood. He'd done the same thing whenever he was in trouble and didn't know how to fix it. "I'll talk to him," I said finally. "But I want you there with me." Marcus nodded. "Of course. We can use the main house. More neutral territory." 10 minutes later, I sat in Marcus' elegant living room, facing my son across a coffee table that probably cost more than Colin's car. He looked even worse up close, his eyes red-rimmed and his hands shaking slightly. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Hello, Colin." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and regrets. Finally, Colin cleared on his throat. "I came to apologize," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know that's not nearly enough, and I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." I waited for him to continue, noting how different he seemed from the arrogant man who'd stood at his father's grave. "The house sale is officially canceled," he continued. "The buyers got their money back, but I had to pay $15,000 in fees and penalties, money I didn't have." "How did you pay it?" Marcus asked, Colin's face flushed with embarrassment. "I had to sell my car, my watch, some other stuff. I'm driving Sienna's old Honda now. Well, I was driving it until yesterday." "What happened yesterday?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "Sienna officially broke off our engagement. She packed up everything she'd left at my apartment and told me she never wanted to see me again." He laughed bitterly. "She said she couldn't marry someone who was worse than broke, someone who was actively dangerous to be around." Dangerous. Colin's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Vincent Torino came to see me last week. He brought 2 of his associates to my apartment and made it very clear that my extension was over. When I told him I didn't have the money, he said he'd be happy to accept payment in other forms." The way Colin said it made my blood run cold. "What kind of other forms?" "He wants me to do jobs for him. Collections mostly. Going to people who owe him money and convincing them to pay up." Colin met my eyes for the first time. "He said if I work for him, he'll consider my debt paid off in 2 years. If I don't..." He didn't need to finish that sentence. We all knew what happened to people who couldn't pay their debts to men like Vincent Torino. "So that's it then," Colin said, his voice hollow. "I'm going to spend the next 2 years being a loan shark's enforcer, assuming I survive that long. I've lost Sienna, I've lost my apartment because I can't pay rent, and I've lost any chance of having a normal life." Despite everything he'd done to me, I felt a stab of maternal concern. "Where are you living?" "In my car, mostly. Sometimes I stay at cheap motels when I can afford it." He looked around Marcus's beautiful house with undisguised envy and resentment. "It's funny. The kid I used to torment for being poor is now living better than I'll probably ever live again." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Colin, do you remember what you said to me the last day I was at your house, when I was 16? Colin's face went pale. "Marcus, I was just a kid. I said a lot of stupid things. You told me that people like me would always be servants, that no matter how much I pretended to be better than I was, I'd always end up cleaning toilets like my mother." Marcus's voice was calm, but I could hear the steel underneath. You said that's all my family was good for. I was 14 years old, Colin protested. Kids say cruel things they don't mean. Do they? Marcus asked quietly. Because you were still saying cruel things 3 weeks ago. To your own mother, at your father's funeral. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Colin stared at his hands, his shoulders shaking with what might have been suppressed sobs. I know I'm a terrible person, he whispered. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but Mom, I'm scared. I'm really scared about what's going to happen to me. For a moment, I almost reached out to comfort him. The maternal instinct to protect my child was so strong, even after everything he'd done. But then I remembered something Marcus had said weeks earlier. I want you to understand what powerlessness feels like. You should be scared, Colin, I said quietly, because for the first time in your life, your actions have real consequences that you can't charm or manipulate your way out of. Colin looked up at me with surprise, as if he hadn't expected such a direct response. So you're just going to let me be destroyed? You're going to let Marcus ruin my life? Marcus isn't ruining your life, I replied. You ruined your own life. Marcus is just making sure you can't ruin anyone else's. I'm your son. Colin's voice rose desperately. Doesn't that mean anything? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured garden. Yes, Colin, it means everything. It means I loved you unconditionally for 35 years. It means I sacrificed my own dreams and ambitions to give you every advantage I could. It means I defended you to teachers and neighbors and even your own father when you showed signs of becoming cruel. I turned back to face him. And it means I failed you as a mother by never teaching you that there are consequences for treating people badly. Colin's face crumpled. Mom, please, I'll change. I'll go to therapy. I'll join Gamblers Anonymous. I'll do whatever it takes. You'll change because you have to now, I said sadly. Not because you want to be a better person, but because you're out of options. That's not real change, Colin. That's just survival. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Colin, there is one thing I'm willing to offer you. Both Colin and I turned to look at him in surprise. If you agree to complete a residential addiction treatment program and commit to 2 years of supervised community service helping elderly and disabled people, I'll pay off your debt to Vincent Torino. Colin's mouth fell open. You'd do that after everything I did to you? I'm not doing it for you, Marcus said firmly. I'm doing it for your mother. She doesn't deserve to spend the rest of her life wondering if her son is safe, even if that son doesn't deserve her concern. And if I refuse? Colin asked. Marcus shrugged. Then you deal with Vincent on your own, and you live with whatever consequences come from that choice. Colin was quiet for a long time, processing the offer. Finally, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, if I do this, if I really try to change, do you think you could ever forgive me? I considered the question carefully. I can forgive you, Colin. I probably already have, because that's what mothers do. But I can't forget what you've shown me about who you really are. And I can't trust you again just because you promised to be different. So what does that mean for us? It means that if you genuinely change, if you become the kind of person who deserves forgiveness, then maybe we can have some kind of relationship again. But it will be a different relationship built on who you become, not who you used to be. Colin wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. And if I don't change, if I can't change, then you'll have to live with the consequences of the choices you've made, just like everyone else does. As Colin left that day, agreeing to Marcus's terms and checking himself into a treatment facility the following week, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope that Colin would magically become a different person, but hope that maybe finally he would learn what it meant to take responsibility for his actions. But more than that, I felt grateful. Grateful for Marcus, who had grown from a frightened boy into a man of integrity. Grateful for the chance to start over at 67. And grateful, finally, to be free from the burden of loving someone more than they were capable of loving me back. The next chapter of my life was just beginning. And for the first time in decades, I was excited to see what it would hold. 2 years later, I stood in my kitchen making Sunday dinner, the autumn sun streaming through windows, that overlooked a garden I'd helped design and plant. The cottage had truly become my home, filled with memories of quiet evenings, long conversations with Marcus, and the kind of peace I'd never thought possible at my age. Marcus had been true to his word about paying off Colin's debt to Vincent Torino, and my son had completed his residential treatment program, followed by community service at a senior center across town. I received monthly reports about his progress from his counselor, but we hadn't spoken directly in over a year. That was about to change. "Mrs. Patterson?" Marcus called from the main house. "Your guest is here." I dried my hands on my apron and walked to the front door, my heart beating faster than I cared to admit. Through the window, I could see Colin standing next to a modest but clean sedan, wearing clothes that actually fit him properly and looking healthier than he had in years. When I opened the door, he smiled tentatively. "Hi, Mom. Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Dinner won't be ready for another hour, but we can talk." We settled in my small living room, the same space where I'd displayed those family photos from Colin's childhood. He glanced at them briefly, and I saw something like regret flicker across his face. "You look good," I said, and meant it. The desperate, haggard man who'd begged for help 2 years ago had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely at peace with himself. "I feel better than I have in years," Colin replied. "The program was harder than I expected, but it helped me understand a lot about myself, about why I became the person I was." "And what did you learn?" Colin was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I learned that I spent most of my life feeling entitled to things I hadn't earned. I learned that I used cruelty as a way to feel powerful when I actually felt weak inside. And I learned that I confused your love for weakness when it was actually strength." These weren't the shallow apologies I'd heard from him in the past. There was a depth to his words that suggested real understanding. "The community service has been eye-opening too," he continued. "Working with elderly people who've been abandoned by their families, seeing what real loneliness looks like. It made me realize how lucky I was to have a mother who never gave up on me, even when I gave her every reason to." "What are you doing for work now?" I asked. "I'm a counselor at the treatment center where I was a patient. It turns out that having lived through addiction and recovery gives me credibility with people who are just starting their journey." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "It's not glamorous work, and the pay isn't great, but I feel like I'm actually helping people instead of just taking from them." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that I recognized as maternal pride. Not the fake pride I'd tried to manufacture when Colin was making poor choices, but genuine admiration for the person he was becoming. "There's something else," Colin said, his voice growing more serious. "I have a girlfriend. Her name is Rebecca, and she's a social worker. She knows everything about my past, including what I did to you. She says she fell in love with who I am now, not who I used to be." "That's wonderful, Colin. I'd like to meet her someday." "She'd like to meet you too. She actually suggested that I reach out to you. She said that anyone who could raise a son with enough conscience to eventually change must be a pretty remarkable woman." Before I could respond, there was a gentle knock at the door. Marcus peered in, looking slightly uncertain. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure everything was going well." "Please come in," I said. "Colin was just telling me about his work." Marcus entered cautiously, and I could see the tension between the two men. They'd seen each other several times during Colin's treatment, but their interactions had been purely professional. Colin stood up and extended his hand. "Marcus, I owe you an apology that's about 29 years overdue." Marcus hesitated, then shook Colin's hand. "You don't owe me anything, Colin. You've been working to change your life. That's enough." "No, it's not enough," Colin said firmly. "I need you to know that I understand what I did to you when we were kids was inexcusable. I was a bully who used my family's economic advantage to make you feel less than human. There's no excuse for that, and I'm sorry." Marcus studied Colin's face for a long moment. "I appreciate the apology, but you should know that what you did to me made me stronger. It taught me early on that some people will judge you based on circumstances you can't control, and that the only way to overcome that is to prove them wrong through your actions." "You certainly did that," Colin said with genuine admiration. Mom told me about the scholarship money, about how you've been taking care of her. I'm grateful that she has someone who truly loves her looking out for her. Something passed between the two men in that moment, an understanding that surprised me with its depth. They would probably never be friends, but they could coexist with mutual respect. Colin, I said, drawing his attention back to me, I want you to know that I'm proud of the work you've done to change your life, but I also want you to understand that the relationship between us is different now. I know, he said quietly. I don't expect to be welcomed back as if nothing happened. I hurt you deeply, and trust has to be rebuilt slowly. Exactly. But I'm willing to try if you are, with boundaries and with realistic expectations. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, in a way we hadn't done since Colin was a child. He told me about his work, his girlfriend, and his plans for the future. I told him about my new life, about the book club I'd joined, and about the volunteer work I was doing at the local library. As the sun began to set, Colin prepared to leave. At the door, he turned back to me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that every good thing in my life now exists because you never completely gave up on me, even when you should have. I'm your mother, Colin. That means I love you even when I don't like you very much. But more importantly, it means I believe in your capacity to become better than you've been. After Colin left, Marcus and I sat together on my small porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. We'd developed this routine over the past 2 years, these quiet moments of companionship that felt more precious to me than any grand gesture. Do you think he's really changed? Marcus asked. I think he's trying to change, which is more than he's ever done before. Whether he succeeds long term remains to be seen. And how do you feel about having him back in your life? I considered the question carefully, cautiously hopeful. I don't need Colin to validate my worth anymore, and I don't need to sacrifice my peace of mind to maintain a relationship with him. If he continues on this path, we might have something genuine together. If he doesn't, I'll be sad but not destroyed. Marcus nodded approvingly. That sounds like wisdom. It's taken me 69 years to learn it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the garden. Finally, Marcus spoke again. Mrs. Patterson, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. What is it? Would you consider letting me adopt you? Legally, I mean. I know it sounds strange at our ages, but you've been more of a mother to me than anyone else ever was. I'd like to make it official. The question caught me completely off guard. Marcus, that's a beautiful gesture, but you don't need to. It's not about need, he said gently. It's about choice. You chose to save me when I was 12 years old, even though I wasn't your son. Now I want to choose you as my family, officially and permanently. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized what he was offering. Not just legal recognition, but a family bond based on love and choice, rather than biology and obligation. Yes, I whispered in her, I would be honored to be your mother. 6 months later, we stood in a courthouse with Rebecca, Colin's girlfriend, and a few close friends as a judge made it official. At 70 years old, I became Denise Wellington, mother to Marcus Wellington, and gained something I'd never expected to have, a son who loved me unconditionally in return. Colin was there too, with Rebecca at his side. He'd been sober for over 2 years now, and while our relationship was still careful and measured, it was genuine in a way it had never been before. As we celebrated afterward at Marcus's house, I looked around at this small group of people who had chosen to be my family, and I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest gift you can receive is the chance to start over. The scared 12-year-old boy I'd decided to help with his homework had grown up to save me in return. My biological son had finally learned what it meant to earn love rather than demand it, and I had discovered that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about recognition, about seeing the best in each other and choosing to nurture it. That night, as I settled into bed in my cottage, surrounded by photos that now included Marcus's graduation from law school and Colin's completion of his recovery program, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete contentment with my life. I'd lost a husband and nearly lost a son to his own selfishness. But I'd gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that love, real love, is always a choice. And when people choose to love you for who you truly are, rather than for what you can provide them, that love can heal wounds you didn't even know existed. At 70 years old, I was finally free to be exactly who I was meant to be. And it was more beautiful than anything I'd ever imagined. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.